is. All right, Will.
All right, let me see if I can share my screen there. We'll go from there. How am I coming in? Is it all loud and clear and
Looks good.
beautiful and radio voice and all that? All right, welcome everyone to my TED Talk. Just build it. How I learned to stop worrying and love the unknown. I was hounded by this team to come on and talk a little bit about it. No, that was a joke. Right. I was on a podcast a while ago where I talked about flow metrics, and so Jamie reached out to me and asked if I could talk to this community at one point. So I said, "Well, yeah, obviously." Right?
That's
Scrum Master
awesome.
of the universe. Who couldn't?
We're so glad you're here.
Yeah.
And for those of you who know me, probably know that flow metrics is a passion of mine. I'm trying to learn more about it and bring it into my own world of work. But yeah, Will and Daniel Vacanti partnered up to do something amazing, and I think he'll tell you about that pretty soon here too. So stay tuned.
We'll talk a bit about it. I'm trying out this talk because I'm always agile, and if I feel super confident about a first release, I've done way too much work on it. So by all means, give me feedback as we're going. I'm going to try to avoid naming specific frameworks. I won't succeed. I already know that. But let's see where we end up. So a little bit about me. My full name is Wilbert Seele. It's a very, very Dutch name. Or at least the first part of it is. The second part is very, very German. I also go by Will, which is a bit easier to pronounce internationally. I am the chief inserter title here at Prosilience. It's my company, so I can give myself whatever title I want. I'm also a professional Scrum trainer with scrum.org. I have been for close to 5 years at this point. I've also been in the steward team over at scrum.org for about 2 of those years. So if you took a scrum.org class in the last 2 years and you didn't like it, I'm sorry. I'm also a professional Kanban trainer with prokanban.org. I have been basically since they started. I think I was trainer number 5 or 6. And I've been working with Daniel for quite a while. I've also been working with Todd and Ryan from Agile for Humans for a while. We just like producing content together. So there's all sorts of stuff you can find online that involves a Dutch person. I do lots of things. I do agile and lean things for organizations. I've been a Scrum Master. I've been a product owner. I've been a development team member. I've done some interim management at times. Please don't hurt me. I also like doing some lean things. I've been into evidence-based management pretty much since the moment I heard about it. I've worked pretty closely with Patricia and Kurt over at scrum.org, trying to get that class off the ground. So if you took it and you liked it, that's great. I wish more companies made use of it. And these days I focus a lot on organizational design and behavioral design. That sounds very, very ominous. But what that honestly means is that instead of trying to directly coach people, I try to create environments where it's just a lot easier to focus on your customers and to focus on value delivery without someone having to tell you to do those things. Because I think a lot of people already want to do great things at work, and we should get stuff out of the way that is blocking that instead of trying to get them to fight the system. Then, what are we going to talk about? Because I have you for, I think, the next 45 minutes or so. We're going to talk a little bit about value estimation and why it doesn't work. And we're going to talk a little bit about effort estimation and how to minimize this. This is where the flow metrics come in. And then we're going to talk a little bit about plans and strategies and why those things are different and how they change in a complex environment. And hopefully by the end of this talk, you will have a lot more free time in your use of Scrum or Kanban or whatever way of working you like. Sound good? So, first things first, value estimation. We're going to start with value estimation because I think ultimately you cannot have a conversation about effort estimation, which flow metrics are a part of, without seeing the bigger picture it is a part of, which is value estimation. Because in order to estimate value and to prioritize a backlog, a few things need to be true, right? You need to know that something is going to be valuable. You need to have an idea of the relative value between items, right? The first part, right, knowing that something is going to be valuable is ultimately what's going to make you decide to either build it or not build it. Prioritization then is the question of what are we going to build first, right? And in order to get an idea of what we want to build first, you need to have an understanding of the relative value between items. Another assumption we're making, or something that needs to be true in order to estimate value, is that whatever value you think the item has at the moment you have the idea or gets into your product backlog, needs to remain up until the point where it's delivered. And finally, we need to have an idea about the effort and / or cost, right? So for value estimation to work, we need to know that something is going to be valuable. That allows us to make a decision. Are we going to build it? Yes or no? We need to have an idea of the relative value between those items. That value needs to remain. It needs to remain valuable as you're working on it. And you need to have an idea about the effort or cost, because again, even if it is valuable, but it takes you way too long or it costs you way too much effort to deliver the thing, you're ultimately still not adding anything to the company. All right. You end up with things that people really like, but that don't end up making a lot of money. Like TikTok, I read recently. Apparently, the company that owns it is making billions of dollars in losses. Problem. Value is an assumption. Oh my God, controversial statement in a group of Scrum Masters. We doing okay?
You can't, everybody's on mute, so you don't get to hear them laugh.
Yeah, no.
It's the sadness. Oh,
I'm hoping there's
value is an assumption. I think in a group of Scrum Masters, I think we all understand that statement.
All right. We understand the statement, but we don't follow through on it. That is at least
Yeah.
something that I'm noticing with a lot of Scrum Masters. Right. Here's kind of the problem that you're facing, right? Let's say we're really good at gambling, right? And our plan, our product backlog, if you're using Scrum, contains 25 items, features that we think are going to be valuable, right? I'm not even going to go into the question of how valuable we think they are. It's just they're either valuable or they're not. Now, how good do you think we are at guessing if something is going to be valuable or not? Right? Anyone ever look at the data of their team? Right? Look at ROI per sprint, those sorts of things. Let's say we're really good at answering that first question, right? Thinking if it's going to be valuable or not. Let's say that every item in that product backlog has a 95% chance of delivering value, some value, any value at all, right? How good is that plan? How good is that entire product backlog? What do you think the likelihood is of delivering a lot of value? High, low, medium? seeing more likely, seeing low. This is where math comes in, right? Right? Let's say every item has a 95% chance of delivering value with each feature. Then we can multiply 95% by 95% by 95%. We do that 25 times. And so we see that if we have a 95% chance of delivering value with each feature, the entire product backlog only has about a 28% chance of actually delivering value as a whole. That's a problem.
So I'm not sure I understand your math on that one.
Front door.
Sorry about that. Trying to understand your math. Admittedly, I'm bad at math, but
right. So every item has its own chance of being valuable, right? About 95%. So in 5% of the times, it's not going to be valuable.
Yep.
Right. We have a product backlog. Right. The chance that every item in that product backlog is going to be valuable as a result is 95% times 95% times 95%. And you do that for each of those 25 items, which means that the chance that every item in that product backlog is going to be valuable of those 25 items is about 28%. If you're right 95% of the times. That's the math. And it goes down very, very quickly, right? If there's a 1 in 10 chance that you don't deliver value per item, that means there's only a 7% chance that everything in that list is going to be valuable. The point I'm getting at here, though, is there's an assumption, right, that we have and that a lot of our teams have, that the items in our product backlog are valuable, right? That's the base assumption. And so we spend a lot of time figuring out which item we do first, right? Trying to establish relative value, right? That has to be true, right? That's the only thing that justifies the amount of time we spent on backlog prioritization, right? Is the idea that everything in there is valuable. We just need to figure out what's the most valuable thing in there. And what I'm trying to prove here is even if we're really good at gambling, that assumption just does not hold. Right? So that first assumption that the things in our product backlog are going to be value and are worth discussing is already false, even at a 95% chance. Right? Which makes any discussion about what are we going to do first kind of pointless, right? Because it doesn't matter. So what's a better way of doing that? Or, well, how am I doing so far? By the way, I just took 25 features here as a thing. How do your product backlogs look? More than 25 items, less than 25 items in there? Right. Show of hands for people with more than 25 items in there? More than 100. How often do you end up in discussions with your team and stakeholders about what to do first? How many different backlog prioritization tools and techniques and stuff do you know? Right? We all know the magic quadrant, right? Effort versus value or effort versus risk. Maybe there's some people in here who have sinned and have done mischief. Right? The point is all of those techniques assume everything in there is valuable. Right? They're trying to answer the question of how valuable it is, but that first assumption doesn't hold. And this is something that my buddy Dan and his friend Pratik drove into in a really interesting article a while ago called Don't Be a Ditka, which you can read over on Medium and procombat.org. But what they did there is they looked at the math to a much greater degree, and they ended up proving and this was a little bit shocking to me, that randomly picking items from your product backlog to do first. Don't be a Ditka. I think it's some sort of American football reference. It'll be in my reference list.
Yeah, Chicago Bears coach.
Yeah. So
back in the day.
They looked at, and they already found that randomly picking items from your product backlog already produces about the same results as using a formalized prioritization technique. But what's even better is to just first in, first out. Right, and first in, first out works because, let me go back a slide. We can reduce this time, right? The time between idea and delivery, because that actually is within our control. So if it is valuable, right, we can assume that value decays over time, right? Right now, your customer wants something because, I don't know, they're asking for it, they're looking for it, it's the hip new thing. But if you wait 6 months in delivering it, it's no longer the hip new thing, right? It's the stuff they've been waiting for 6 months. And why isn't it here already? And it's mostly annoying. So what does that mean, right? These are pointless, but these we can control to some extent, right? We can reduce the time between idea and delivery, and we can kind of guesstimate a little bit about effort and or / cost. So what does all that mean? Well, it just means that if you guess that something could be valuable, stop worrying about it and just build it. There we go. I have solved backlog prioritization for all of you. How are we doing so far? All right. So then, part 2, effort estimation. We are really bad at effort estimation. We've been bad at exact estimation because complexity, right? Solving new problems in new ways with new technologies, with new peoples in new markets where suddenly everyone has to work from home and Zoom doesn't do a good screen sharing function. Or even worse, your team is forced to use Teams. I have my own preferences, ladies and gentlemen. But work is complex, so we all know exact estimation is really, really hard. But we've also been really bad at relative estimation, right? Story pointing, the t-shirt sizing. Just as a show of hands, by the way, if you've used story points or t-shirt sizes in the past, how often have you actually looked back in time with your team to have a check on how good your guesses actually were? Guilty silence. Never retro. So how good are you, Vic?
Bob did a full breakdown for 6 months.
We got pretty good at it. Takes
It was
practice.
not good. It was not good, you say.
Discovery helps.
I always say, how can you estimate something that you don't even understand the scope of the work, right? At the point that the work is being presented to you, you don't really know without doing some research and some analysis as to what the work even is. And then they want you, like, project management, and they want you to give an estimate. And I understand that they need to understand. It's sort of a dilemma because they need to understand how much it's going to cost them in terms of how long is it going to take. So they ask the teams to estimate, but the teams can't estimate really because they have no idea what's involved. They haven't researched it. It's complex work, where more is unknown than is known. So there's this dilemma there. So what do you do with that? Because it makes sense that that someone needs to know, are we going to spend the money on this or not? And what is this going to cost us before we ever dive into it?
Yep.
But yet you can't really give it any kind of estimate that's valuable and or accurate. So what do you do?
Hold that thought. I might have an answer for you at the end of this session.
Perfect.
All right. So relative estimation, aside from teams indeed that have the discipline to continuously look back and evaluate how good at it they actually are, tends to be problematic. And still, again, subject to a lot of change, right? And a lot of complexity. Flow metrics still aren't what organizations like, but at least they're honest. Right. And that's where we're going to get into. I'm seeing some people already talking about right sizing. That's definitely where flow metrics come in. The reason organizations don't like flow metrics is they are honest about chances. Right. So I quite like flow metrics. Wrote a book about it with Dan. What I like about them is they're highly automatable. They're time-based, so everyone understands them. It brings estimation down into a simple yes or no question, and a bit more about that in a bit. And it's honest about chances. So anytime you look at a forecast with flow metrics, there's always a percentage attached to it. Right. So when we talk about service level estimate and a service level expectation, we always say there's always a percentage attached to it, right? We think this item is going to take 7 days or less, 85% of the time, which means that we're upfront saying, well, 15% of the time, we're probably going to be wrong about this. If we do a larger forecast forwards, like when do you think this is done, right? We might say, well, there's a 95% chance of it done being somewhere in June. Still 5% chance it's not going to be done at that point, right? But it uses math. Right. And it is honest about its certainties. And this makes it so that organizations don't like it because, well, most of the time I've used flow metrics, and I don't know if other people here have experimented with them in the past, but when I tell a stakeholder that has a multi-million-dollar project going on, and he asks, when is it done? And I say, well, there's an 85% chance it's going to be done at the deadline you communicated with the customer. They get a little bit upset with me, right? Because I want 100% certainty. Yeah, no. So what are these flow metrics? Flow metrics measure two things. That's it. You can get started immediately with them after this call. The only two things we measure are time and stuff. Right? No pokers, no t-shirts, no animals, no fruits, time and stuff. Right? On the time dimension, we look at two things, right? How old is the stuff that we're currently working on? Right? What is the age of this thing? And every time we finish something, how long did it take us to finish this? Right? Fancier words for that is what's the work item age and what's the cycle time. On the stuff front, we look at how much stuff are we working on right now, right? What's our work in progress? And how much stuff did we get done in a given time frame, right? What's our throughput? Right? And that time frame can be whatever you want, can be per month, can be per week, can be per sprint, can be per day. If you ask Dan, he's going to say measure it by day. I'm a bit more flexible in that regard. But really, those are the only four things that we're asking you to measure. And really what you're only measuring here is two things, right? Time and stuff. It turns out that just by measuring these two things, that fixes all of your estimation problems and your forecasting problems. How would it do that? Well, assuming you have a team that's relatively stable, that's working on a product, right, that they'll continue working on for a little while longer, we can use the data from the past to make some predictions about the future, right? In this regard, it's no different than what we already do with velocity, right? If you have a historic velocity of, let's say over the past 6 sprints, 22 points, 24 points, 18 points, 19 points, you can make that estimate for the next sprint as well, right? What are you going to do? Well, probably somewhere about 22 points worth of stuff. But that involves pointing all of those different things, right? What we're doing here is we're essentially just skipping the middleman and saying, well, how much stuff did we get done last sprint? 6 items, 5 items, 6 items again, 7 items, 4 items. All right, well, given all of that, how many items do you think we can get done this sprint? Right? And we can use existing mathematical tools like Monte Carlo simulations to run, well, there's a 95% chance we'll get at least 4 things done. There's an 85% chance we'll get at least 6 things done. Dear product owner, dear team, how much of a risk are we willing to take? Sounds good? Now we can use that exact same approach to then look at all the individual items, right? Okay, we're going to do 5 things this sprint. How do we know all 5 of those things are going to fit? Right? Do we look at them all individually? Do we think this thing will take 3 days and this thing will take 4 days and this thing will take 8 days? No, right? We can look back in time, look at our cycle time, see how much time it takes us to get things done, right? And we can observe, hey, we finished 85% of all items historically in under 5 days or less. So here's a new item. Team, do you think we can finish it in 5 days or less? Thumbs up or thumbs down? Everyone thumbs up? You're done. It's estimated. Go work on it. Now you might think, oh God, but what if all of the items are super big and take the exact 5 days or even longer? Well, maybe, but it's rarely happened, at least not historically. And if your team isn't confident that they can finish it in 5 days or less, or 6 days or less, or whatever you put your comfortable right size, break it down. Right? Instead of trying to compensate for randomness or trying to bring randomness down by trying to fully understand the item before we work on it, because this is often what refinement turns into. We're saying, no, embrace the randomness. Look at the randomness of the past and assume that things are going to be just as random in the future. And actually, it turns out that if you do that, you can make some pretty accurate forecasts. How's that sound?
I think it sounds great. I think it's going to make a lot of a lot of people who I think it'll make a lot of people uncomfortable. I think it's definitely a mindset shift, right? And you sort of have to just prove the math over time to get their, how do you get their buy-in, right? Like
the interesting thing I found is that if your team uses any sort of work management system, right, whether it's a target process or Azure DevOps or Jira, which is the cross we all have to bear at one point in our careers, all of that data is already there, right? You don't even have to prove it forward. You can actually historically already prove it, right? Maybe not to a great amount of detail because usually the data isn't all that great, but you can prove that, hey, actually the amount of stuff that you've been able to get done sprint by sprint and the variability in that stuff is actually probably relatively stable within that 95%, 85%, or 70% boundary. But the big thing that I find most teams struggle with isn't that part. It's these two parts, right? It's that effort estimation isn't about understanding the item well enough to finish building it. Right? Effort estimation is about understanding it just enough to start. Right? And this is one of the things that I know Ken and Jeff have been trying to get across in the Scrum Guide as well, right? When they talked about ready, right? What does it mean for an item to be ready for sprint? Well, it's just the team is reasonably confident they'll be able to finish it. Right? But anything that goes beyond reasonably confident is wasted effort because they would have found that stuff out anyway after they started building it. Right? But that mind shift going from it's got to be good enough to finish to it's good enough to start. That's where your challenge as a Scrum Master lies, much more than the metrics part. Do you recognize that? You recognize that mindset in your teams or maybe even in yourself? All right. So let's bring some of that stuff together. And here's where we're really going to make the leap into kind of the challenges you face as you go into this kind of stuff and you look at kind of the business implications. It's because Jamie, you already mentioned it, right? There are people that have plans and they need to know when those things are going to be done and how much they're going to cost. And that's a challenge, right? And so I want to talk a little bit about plans and strategy. And very often these things tend to get mixed. And at least when I work with companies and they talk about strategy, what they really mean is long-term planning. Recognizable? Right? Those things are not the same. And if you understand that they are not the same and you're able to talk to your stakeholders about that, that opens up a wealth of possibility for you in using these things to do better things with your team. Is a lot of stuff on this slide. I'm going to give you a crash course in an MBA right now, right? Plans. Plans are concerned with what is going to be delivered, when it's going to be done, and how much it's going to cost. In other words, they are inward facing. They are about what you are going to do. They are about cost in terms of time, in terms of money, in terms of effort. But mostly they are under the organization's control, right? You can plan for things. They are about outputs. Strategy, on the other hand, is concerned with who you're going to target, what's going to make you unique, and how those things fit together. Right? It's a gamble, or with a fancier word, it's a hypothesis. Right? So strategy is not about costs. Strategy is about investments. Right? How much are you willing to invest to validate this hypothesis? Most importantly, a strategy is not fully under the organization's control. They can formulate a strategy, but realizing the outcome of that strategy involves that most mercurial of all beings in the universe, the customer. And customers tend to have opinions of their own, right? Certainly Microsoft had amazing plans when they made the Zune. You all remember the Zune? A wonderfully built device. Worked well, hardware was good, software was good. It had features the iPod didn't have. Nobody bought it. Was it because they were late? Maybe. But the customer is mercurial. Here's where the human factor comes in, though, right? So knowing all of these things, strategy is scary, right? Because strategy is about the unknown, right? There's no guarantees in strategy. The outcomes are not under our control. Plans feel safe, right? That's why we spend a lot of time on them, right? Here are all the things we want. Here is the time it's going to take to build those things. Here are the costs involved with all of those things. And then we have something, right? And even if the value isn't there, you still have a thing, right? So a lot of time is spent making plans because they are fully under our control, and that makes us feel safe. It involves not acknowledging the scariness of our assumptions being wrong. Even though we know that a plan is full of assumptions. So in a complex world, knowing all of that, right, plans are optional at best, but mostly useless. Right? The longer term that planning is, the more assumptions it contains, and the higher the likelihood that multiple of those assumptions are going to be wrong. And the longer they are allowed to exist, the greater the impact of them being wrong. Strategy, on the other hand, is required, right? It used to be the case that you could get by as a company without doing any form of strategy, right? Through cost leadership, right? Being the leanest, meanest, most cost optimized company in the world. But that doesn't fly anymore because you're ripe for disruption, right? Change happens faster and faster, right? Group such as this knows that, right? So looking at what could we do for our customers? Where should we be going? What is the next gamble we want to take? What is the next hypothesis that we want to test? That becomes critical to your business survival, right? And that shifts the burden of estimation, right? Because if we're talking about a plan where we've predetermined exactly what we want, or to some extent what we want, and how much time we have, then indeed, Jamie, then I need to go to a team and say, can you do it in this time, or how much time do you need? But if I'm talking about strategy, if I'm talking about validating an hypothesis, if I'm thinking as an investor, now I have to ask the question, how much money am I willing to spend on this thing to validate this assumption? Right? I don't necessarily know what I want, but I know the assumptions I have, and I know that I'm willing to spend $500,000 or 5 sprints or whatever to test that investment and see if it makes sense to continue investing in it. And I think as SP, you might like what's coming next. So I said I was going to try to avoid talking about frameworks. I do find one because I find using flow metrics by themselves allows you to become better and better at delivering things consistently, but it doesn't tell you where to go, right? It allows you to test hypotheses very, very quickly, but it doesn't help you in saying what hypothesis you want. So here's where my passion for evidence-based management comes in. This is not a plug about, go use this because there's many other ways of working. I just happen to like this. The point of evidence-based management is kind of saying, hey, we have this big strategic goal that we want to work towards, but big strategic goals tend to be very, very far in the future. Right? So on an intermediate level in the next 3 months or so, what kind of a goal do we want to reach to make sure that we're on the right path? And if we want to peel that back even further, right, in the next week or in the next sprint, what's the kind of goal that we want to reach to test if we're actually heading in the right direction, if that strategy makes sense, right? And that last part, right, that last part of what is the goal that we want to reach on an immediate tactical level, next week, next 2 weeks, next month is very far in the future. What do we need to do to validate a small hypothesis? And that you can plan for, right? And anything beyond that point is essentially wasted effort, right? Because that short term of a planning you can do very quickly and continuously. Right? And that level of planning, that is where flow metrics come in handy. And yeah, if you're in a Scrum context, And I'm not saying this is a one-to-one translation, but you could read intermediate goal as a product goal, and you could read immediate tactical goal as a sprint goal, right? So the point of your sprint is to validate, does the product goal still make sense? And are we on the right way to reach it? Right? And if you have a clear hypothesis to test that, then you can have a look at what do we need to do to actually get to that point. Right? And there you can look at what is our throughput like, how many items fit in, how big do we want to make those items? Right? And so with that, the whole plan-based paradigm kind of goes out the window because it's not needed anymore, right? Because now you're acting directly on strategy. So getting to the point, right? Value estimation, prioritization doesn't work. Because it doesn't work, plans don't work. As an alternative, right? Big plans, right? As an alternative, just set your next small goal and go build it. Then see what happened, adapt, and do it again, and do it again, and do it again until either the investment doesn't make sense anymore or you all drive fat Teslas. I don't know.
That sounds all right.
Final thoughts. The other reason I'm kind of saying once you get into this flow of continuous delivery, you want to let go of a lot of backlog. And the reason why is because you run into sunk cost fallacy, right? The more effort you put into your plan, right? Whether that's a formal plan, project plan, or a product backlog, the harder it is to let go of things, right? Because we've already spent so much effort on it, right? And this is why I'm very adamant about saying, don't waste your time prioritizing. Just if you think it's a good idea to build, just build it as fast as possible, and just keep going, right? And if it turns out that, hey, we just finished the sprint and this next item doesn't actually look that valuable anymore, just don't do it, do the next thing, right? But then don't do it later. No, just don't do it, right? And again, the math is pretty clear on this. Your results are going to be better. It's you, right? Your human biases that get in the way. In the middle, everything looks like a failure. Yeah. This is where the hard work happens, right? And yeah, my point being is go build, right? Don't worry about what you're going to build, right? Because what you're going to build is going to change over time, right? Very, very quickly as new information emerges, right? On the other hand, don't go looking back in time and trying to figure out how valuable was this feature and how valuable was this feature, because you're not going to be able to distinguish them individually, right? It just doesn't work that way. Right? Which feature added more value to Word? Was it spell check? Was it font changing? Was it different sizes fonts? They all work together. And my friend Todd Miller at one point spent an entire year as a product owner trying to figure out what the value of each individual feature was after it was released. And then he had a nervous breakdown and he gave up because you can't, right? Because it's a complex system, right? So build. Right? Don't look at all the things in separation, but look at your investment strategy, right? What are the things that we're saying yes to? What are the things that we're saying no to? And do we actually see our product becoming more valuable? All right. We're in the question phase. So I'm seeing some questions in the chat. I have no idea who came first. So can I rely on a facilitator to help me out?
Sure. Yeah. So I think we'll start with let's start with Karen. Oh, you just talked about that. Never mind. So SP says, I think this may work really well for small startups, but not sure if it's feasible for large/public companies. Maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit to give some context for. If SP is still on.
Sorry, I was on mute.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah, so I think this is actually really heart of what iterative delivery is, right? And a small scale and things like that. And I think that it really would work well if there are less moving parts in terms of, you know, less cross-functional groups that are involved, maybe 2 or 3, but not like 5, 7, right? So yeah, I mean, it's just an opinion. Because I think it's just kind of harder to do that with a larger companies where just building something and then not. I mean, we're not thinking about the cross-functional work.
Yeah.
I understand also the permutation of the number that he was presenting, but that's only if everything is independent of one another. But you're not thinking about all the things that are in the backlog that actually has some sequential dependence or something that needs to be done, you know, beforehand, you know, and things like that. So
you're right. You're absolutely right. Dependencies are the enemy here, right? Both on a feature set. Right. We can't have this thing without building this other thing first. The problem there, the way I see it at least, is that if you have a dependency in your backlog, you don't have, let's say you have one item that's dependent on the other item, right? You don't have 2 items, you have one big item, right? So my kind of lazy Scrum Master answer to that is, you know, put them together again and slice them differently so that they are independent. Now, if you're in a very complex technical environment, that may not hold, but then let's not kid ourselves. Let's say that item is bigger. And so the investment is going to be bigger. And so maybe we were not able to actually finish this big thing within a sprint. Maybe our sprint length is wrong. Right? I've worked with large scale providers in the past where once we became honest about the size of the work and we stopped kind of doing fake slicing, we said, okay, our sprints have to be a month long. We can't finish something quicker than that, right? But then at least be honest about that, but also be honest that that actually increases our risk profile. I think the other thing you mentioned is also very true, right? If you're in a very siloed organization where you have to deal with many different teams and many different moving parts, in a way, you're not even talking about value anymore, right? You're just talking about coordination, right? And I think there's a different conversation at that point that you need to have with whoever owns that product. That all of those moving parts are actually making the corporate are actually hobbling the corporation, right? Because you're no longer even talking about value; you're just talking about coordination, right? And flow metrics isn't going to solve that for you. Now, I've done that with organizations, and I can tell you they fire me about 1/3 of the time I have that conversation with them. The other 2/3, we experiment, right? That actually opens the door for true cross functionality and internal open sourcing and all those other fun things. But it exposes the pain. So I don't think I answered the question. I hope it gives you stuff to think about, though.
I agree with you. And all the things that you do say. And there's way too much effort and energy involved in doing what you're saying, even though it's a very simple thing. And I really think that you hit the heart of what you know, iterative development is and being agile. But yeah, how do we, I think what it comes down to is how do we translate this simple thing to something that is in operation, you know? So I think that is the conversation piece. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Jamie, do you have time for one more?
Yeah, sure. If some of you need to go, this is being recorded, so you can check back. I'll be posting it to our YouTube channel sometime later today. But yeah, let's do another one. Sheila has one here. The end. In large organizations, you have competing priorities. You have to get to agreement on the absolute priorities before you can get agreement on what should be built first. You may need to have a discussion with all stakeholders to get them to agree on absolute priorities. I don't know if that's a question or more of just a comment or.
Well, it does certainly trigger a story in me, because I've certainly been there. I think we've all been there. The fun thing about flow metrics, right? Because we're just talking about stuff in time, right? And I think the translation we all made into our heads is, oh, this is about product backlog items and days and sprints and all of those things. But you can also do it for a entire portfolio of projects and programs. I recently did that for a company that I work with occasionally, and we looked at their strategic priorities, right? They had just gone through this month-long planning session, and they'd come out with the stuff they wanted to do in 2023, right? And they still had some things in progress. But we had historical data for 3 years on past projects, right? How many they were working on at the same time, how long they all took. And using that data, we actually showed that, all right, if no new work emerges, which it never does, right? If no new work emerges at the portfolio level, the agenda for 2023 will be done 85% likelihood in the middle of 2027. Now, they were a little bit upset. They went over my math. They had other people look at the math, which again, it's not hard, ladies and gentlemen. It's described in the book. And you know, that opened up that conversation for, okay, we need to either dramatically reduce the amount of work that we have planned for 2023, which we just spent a month, right, trying to make very difficult choices in, or we might want to do something about the service level expectation of 420 days or less. So that created kind of the ground for downsizing a lot of the work and also reducing the amount of work in progress, right? Again, it's not a solution. It just exposes the problem in a much clearer and unavoidable way. I don't know if Sheila's still in the call, but did that go a little bit into your question?
Yeah.
All right. Good to hear.
Were there
Okay.
any questions that I missed?
I'm kind of looking at the time, and I need to go start making dinner because my
Yeah,
fiance
yeah.
is very German, and she's going to get really upset with me if the food's not done. Final thoughts. If you have any further questions, hit me up on LinkedIn or send me an email at wjseele@brazilians.consulting. I would love to come back for just a random Q&A. If you're down with that. stuff to read. I'll share the presentation after. I'll send it over to Jamie. If you want to go read the book, Flow Metrics for Scrum Teams, really easy way to get started. If you want to know more about all of this other stuff I've just been talking about how this fits into a bigger picture, then here's kind of some of the stuff I read that I thought was really, really inspiring and that helped me along my journey. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed the talk, and thank you all for attending.
Yeah, this is awesome. Well, thank you. And definitely we'll touch base on and plan a time for Ask Me Anything session with you in the near future. Thanks everyone else for coming, and those of you stuck around a little bit later. Have a good rest of your day, evening, and have a great weekend.
Everyone take care. Thanks, Will.
Bye,
Thanks
everyone.
again, Will.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.